undeniably they have the reason for that at that point in time. You may not think it's a good reason. I may not think it's a good reason. Yet at the end of the day, it is that person's choice. Suicide is lawful. Attempted suicide is lawful. If people want to end their life, they should be able to do so. One's life is one's own property. Ladies and gentlemen, euthanasia is justified. Euthanasia is simply the deliberate advancement of a person's death for the benefit of that person. It is the painless killing of a patient performed towards the hopelessly, desperately, and incurably ill, such as those who experience brain death. You simply cannot be brain undead. So rather than seeing the situation as many would, as an act of murder, euthanasia itself has a definite meaning of assisted suicide. Euthanasia is poles apart from murder. I'll tell you what it is not. It is not a matter of determining whether a person should die. Rather, it is helping a person to die following his or her will. Okay, first of all, let's talk about how it relieves suffering. I hope that we can all agree on the fact that no one should have to die in the form of pain. It has even been speculated that people's support for euthanasia is essentially about not having to die in pain. Sure, pain medications are used to alleviate symptoms, yet this is often followed by side effects, and it may even leave the patient in a state of sedation. And during this whole time, they're not even within a considerable state of living. They're merely waiting to die. No one wants to live in a state where they cannot even breathe, or talk, or hear, and is simply suffering. People do want to live, and merely existing is not enough. There is more to life than existing in such a state. Yet, many would perceive euthanasia as unethical, and that we should all wait. Wait for a revolutionary science discovery to solve our problems. Wait for a technological innovation. But wait for what, ladies and gentlemen? A miracle? Or something that may or may not even exist in a future to occur? This line of thought may be wise in some situations, but it certainly does not apply in the case of euthanasia. As mentioned before, euthanasia is performed towards the incurably and terminally ill. There is 0% chance of the patient surviving. Forcing them to be kept alive against their own will is ruled as torture. In light of this, euthanasia is a matter of personal choice. Now, isn't it just immoral to live through a life of pain and suffering? Thank you.
Euthanasia. It's just one of those words that gives a certain magnitude of hypothetical compassion and mercy to what is in reality an abominable and destructive act. An act that I believe is murder. The problem with this issue is that people only understand the surface of this very controversial affair. But I'm going to help you to achieve what all your parents encouraged you to do when you were children. Don't judge a book by its cover. So let's read the inside. Voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary euthanasia are the three forms of murder used. But I will mainly discuss involuntary and voluntary. Voluntary euthanasia occurs at the request of the person who dies. Probably the second most common point pro-euthanasia people bring up is the so-called right. But what we are talking about is not giving a right to a person who is killed, but the right to the person who does the killing. In other words, euthanasia is not about the right to die, it's about the right to kill, and I repeat, murder. It is about changing the law and public policy so that doctors, relatives, and many others can directly and intentionally commit homicide. Also, according to the NHS, voluntary euthanasia is the start of a slippery slope that leads to involuntary euthanasia, which I will explain later, and the killing of people who are thought undesirable. Let me, however, address the major argument, that one should end his suffering if he wants to. Makes sense, doesn't it? Well, actually, no. The alternative argument directly contradicts this reasoning, stating that there is no reason for a person to suffer either mentally or physically because effective end-of-life treatments are available. Therefore, euthanasia is not a valid treatment option, but rather represents a failure on the part of the doctor involved in a person's care. Also, people think unbearable pain is the main reason people seek euthanasia. But actually, some surveys in the USA and Netherlands showed that less than a third of the requests for euthanasia were because of severe pain. I would now also like to bring up involuntary euthanasia. Yes, it is exactly what it sounds like, killing someone who has chosen to live, basically against his or her will. Sounds familiar? Well, it should. It's murder. Yes, it's also considered a form of active euthanasia, and by legalizing active euthanasia in all contexts, you are, in other words, legalizing homicide. I know what it is to suffer. I've had 2 classes with Mr. Nadeem, but I never wanted to kill myself. No, but on a more serious note, there's nothing undignified about going through a terminally ill disease and writhing in pain. The indignity lies within capitulation.
Premise that a significant historical recognition should extend especially to the evolution of the idea of death and of dying, especially in relation to both the existence that the person lived and his expectations of an afterlife. In the Greek world, for example, there were different conceptions of the afterlife, but the expression good death was used mainly in reference to the manner in which the experience of a lifetime was concluded. For a warrior, for example, the good death is their heroic death in battle. Think of Hector in the Trojan Wars. For a craftsman or a merchant, it could be the peaceful death surrounded by the affection of his family. In ancient world, there was already a kind of social euthanasia, so that societies as Sparta, the Roman world, and the most archaic cultures suppressed the people that might be a burden to them. We can also easily assume that primitive people abandoned to their fate all those who didn't appear to be able to withstand the struggle for survival. In modern times, especially in the 20th century, the demand for euthanasia and social euthanasia is generally grew, and it is practiced more massively. In 1936, a proposal was presented in London by the Society for Voluntary Euthanasia, founded in 1935 by Lord Moynihan and Dr. Killick-Miller, but it was rejected by the House of Lords. In 1938, was also founded the American Society for Voluntary Euthanasia in New York by the Reverend Charles Potter. After World War I and after World War II, the debate for voluntary euthanasia, however, didn't stop, but continued intensively as new medical discoveries allowed the survival, sometimes in rather poor physical conditions, of people who in other times would not have been able to survive, and that are now living in the conditions of a vegetable. And in continuation to the use of this terminology is often said, not without a good dose of brutality, to give an implicit negative value judgment on the dignity of the person in this condition. In 1980, it is founded the World Federation of Right to Die Societies right here in Oxford by 27 groups from 18 different countries. In 2001 was approved the law that legalized euthanasia in the Netherlands, followed by Belgium in 2002. Finally, to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, history has taught us that we all have a tendency to build a society where each individual is free and able to choose for himself what kind of death he wants to have. This because we were all born with the desire and the instinct to rule our destiny, if this does not harm anyone. Why then should we not legalize active euthanasia and limit this need we all have to self-rule ourselves, when this kind of freedom is what all humankind has been looking for, from when we learned how to control fire as prehistoric men to the right of free expression in modern times.
Dear friends and proposition, most people think unbearable pain, like extreme physical pain or paralysis, are the main reasons for why people search for euthanasia. Surprisingly, surveys in the USA and the Netherlands have proved otherwise, showing that only less than a third of requests for euthanasia were because of severe or unbearable pain. it would appear that most of the people seek euthanasia because of psychological linked factors, such as depression, loss of dignity, or they might even feel pressured by the family because of financial linked factors. Now, is a patient who is clinically depressed or may feel pressured by the family to proceed with euthanasia really in the right state of mind to make a clear judgment about his or her life? One of the main arguments to legalize euthanasia in all circumstances is the right to give the patient the freedom of choice. But nobody seems to talk about how the freedom of choice can affect other individuals in the society. Evidence seems to suggest that euthanasia doesn't just affect the single individual who desires euthanasia, but it can have side effects on the rest of the society, especially on the family members and on the doctors participating in euthanasia. In 1995, 405 Dutch doctors were interviewed regarding their feelings after their most recent case of euthanasia. It was reported that 75% of doctors expressed feeling of discomfort when practicing euthanasia. 50% of euthanasia were followed by emotional stress. And in America, it has been reported that 24% of doctors regretted administering euthanasia. Doctors describe being profoundly affected, being shocked by the suddenness of death, and having a sense of powerlessness. This shows how significant adverse side effects, such as emotional and psychological stress, doctors may experience when administering euthanasia. Family members may also suffer from negative side effects. For instance, some members of the family may find it hard to cope with the idea that they lost a family member because of euthanasia. Also, they may not agree that it is the best course of action for a loved one to choose active euthanasia, causing conflicts and possible family splits. This clearly shows that our society is not ready to take the next step into active euthanasia. And apart from sending the message to our future generations that we gave up, it can negatively affect other members of society. Thank you.
But the everlasting had not set his canon against so slaughtered. William Shakespeare, Hamlet. Ladies and gentlemen, legislators commonly avoid the topic of euthanasia because they see the involvement of different religious beliefs as too differentiating. Now, I would like to raise your awareness regarding the link between euthanasia and religion. As an example of religious ritual that can be compared to a form of active euthanasia, as harakiri or seppuku was a way of dying which used to be in the third most common religion in the world, being Buddhism. Ritual sacrifices. This ritual involves a chosen specialist person that helps a fellow relative in the act of death. Different to other religions are summarized as Japanese warriors that performed Buddhism did not see it as an atrocious element, but rather as the aim of life. During the religious wars, warriors and knights in principle accepted the idea in the non-permanence of the world. I consider that the ability of the soul and honor is more important than preservation of the body. As I believe, soul continues the life after death in the body and reincarnate into another life. I want you to realize that we should let a person to pass away and even help him by active euthanasia. There is no way of dying. Life on earth is temporary. Another example is United States of America. In some states of America, like in Washington, Montana, and Arizona, the church accepts euthanasia. All people have the right to choose the time of the death. It's a myth that euthanasia is a burden. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I am here to speak against the act of active euthanasia, which has a global impact on religion-based groups and societies. Human lives are special, since God created it, so we have no right to take away life. We must not forget that we are not born because of our own wish, but because Almighty wanted us to be there on earth. God chose to give each of us life and gave each of us the human quality that is respected in the constitution of many countries in the statement, the right to live first for God and then for our families and dear ones. So, we have a responsibility as in accordance with the will of God to stop any active effort to kill someone. The Hindu principle of ahimsa, that is, non-violence, states that all life cannot be taken and that it is part of the liberation process that is based on karma. Euthanasia will hinder that karma from happening. According to karma, a Hindu should have an ideal natural death before going to heaven. Hindus also believe that by accepting euthanasia, they accept some lives worth less than others. In addition, allowing euthanasia weakens the society's respect for the sanctity of life and thus is against the absolute sovereignty of God over life and death. The majority of Christians believe that taking a life for any reason is interfering with God's plan and is comparable to murder. The Islamic community considers life as sacred and precious and are therefore against euthanasia. They believe that Allah has given a life to each person and it is Allah who will decide the lifespan of a person. So, all these religions show us that human life is priceless and are more valuable than any other thing on this earth. And regardless of what you believe in, the consistency of this value in all these religions prove that it is a universal truth. Many religions believe from the past that a doctor's duty is to preserve life. And so, they're scared that if euthanasia is to be legalized in a country, then the relationship of trust between the doctor and the patient can be destroyed. Why would certain people be so determined in dying? Would they not, if they felt value in their life and according to the proposition, choose to die well, want to spend their time staying alive? Well, the freedom of choice desperately insists us on making rash decisions against our religion. Our freedom of will not only affects the doctors and patients, not even the families, but eventually affects the society as a whole. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, human rights have always been one of the biggest legal issues. Regarding euthanasia, we want to make you aware that there is a close link to the human right to life. So why isn't there a human right to have an individual and personal arbitration when facing death? Even if very few countries have legalized euthanasia, it does not mean the subject should stay out of the legislators' deliberations. Since euthanasia is such a moral debate and has implied ethical, psychological, and religious beliefs, beyond doubt, only the law is capable of changing the current conflicts many patients have. As clearly stated in Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, no one shall be subjected to torture or to inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Let's focus on the word torture. Torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person. Now think of a person that is suffering from an illness, whose life is mostly lived in hospitals and has to withstand cruel pains. Keeping this person alive like that is, if you remember the definition that I've just given you, torture, which is legally, as we all know, not allowed. So why do we accept that these suffering people are kept alive, even if they express the wish to die? We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that legalizing euthanasia would reinforce our battle against torture. According to Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, every human has a right to private life. Indeed, the definition of private life generally includes that the way you die should only be the concern of you and your family. Due to this, we do not believe that anybody, except yourself, can impact your decision on life or death.
Point of information. How about involuntary euthanasia, where you express that you want to live, however they kill you anyway?
Can I answer this later?
Yeah, sure.
Due to this, we do not believe that anybody, except yourself, can impact your decision on life or death. Therefore, government and authorities are on weak moral ground when they prohibit people from exercising this right. Let me give you a common situation that can help you picture euthanasia. If you have a right to divorce an abusive husband, why do you not have a right to divorce an incurable disease? So logically, euthanasia and divorce are similar legal concepts with similar consequences. Families are both involved in both cases, and therefore should have the same legal status. The psychological, moral, and economic benefits that have been listed hopefully will contribute to a positive approach regarding euthanasia, which we promote. The pessimistic stereotype linking euthanasia to murder and personal ethical beliefs should be replaced by advertising the individual right to choose.
Let me ask you all a question. Why would someone wish to kill himself? What reasons would any one of you have to be killed? The answer is fear. Fear of unbearable physical pain, fear of being a burden to one's family, and fear of being left alone to be, but not to live anymore. Euthanasia does solve these problems, but it is like getting bullied in school. Instead of telling someone that you need help, you just take the easy way out and pretend that you're ill and not go to school anymore. The easy way out without facing your own fears head on. Now, these fears are actually easy to dispatch. The first point I'm making, probably the major argument in favor of euthanasia, how we heard before, torture, and physical pain. This argument is not valid. Nearly all pain can be completely eliminated. In those rare cases where it can't be eliminated, it can still be reduced significantly if proper treatment is provided. If a patient under a doctor's care is in excruciating pain, then there's definitely a need to find a different doctor. But not the doctor should kill the patient, but the doctor should control the pain. Even if the fear with pain is dealt with, there's still the fear of being left alone or not cared for. There comes a time when continued attempts to cure are not compassionate, wise, or medically sound anymore. That is when hospice, including in-home hospice care, and palliative care can be of such a great help because it provides emotional and spiritual support in a loving and caring environment. That is the time when all effort should be placed on making the patient's remaining time comfortable. At this point, I want to quote the World Health Organization, who already in the 1990s said that with the development of modern methods of palliative care, legalization of euthanasia is unnecessary now that practical alternative to death in pain exists. There should be concentrated efforts on implementing programs of palliative care rather than yielding to pressure for legal euthanasia. And this has shown itself to be true. Professor Dr. Lieker, leading doctor of the palliative medicine in Klagenfurt, Austria, says that in the last 25 years of all the 1,000 patients who were in his clinic, only a single one expressed the wish to die. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why these fears are unfounded. We should not aspire to kill our patients, but to kill these fears that make them want to kill themselves. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, one of the principal questions in contemporary medical ethics that bleeds into society, social morality, is the question of euthanasia. Should modern medicine do all it can to save a patient, or should the issue regarding equality not be our primary concern? What is the moral balance between preserving life and preventing a once vital human from remaining comatose, or sometimes for years? For us it's clear. We are supportive of a rich, quality and enjoyable life. The medicine nowadays is as intelligent as it is. Why should we leave people suffer if we can save them out of the claws of being tied to a hospital's bed? As we have just learned that euthanasia translated means good death, so to stay true to the topic, we must have a good death. Now with our technology, it is possible that the patient suffers no pain. The practice is injected to render the patient's comatose, followed by a second injection which stops the heart. The way we perform it per protocol, we administer by fast, intravenous infusion or injection a coma-inducing drug. And since these injections can cause pain before administering, we intravenously drug is first injected. No pain, no gain. The famous saying that there's no gain without pain. This has a deep meaning for a supporter of euthanasia. So after the coma has been introduced, they feel nothing. You take 3 more breaths and your heart stops beating. You feel no pain, just the feeling of final release. In the past, cesarean birth was disallowed, as it interacted with the Christian belief. Nowadays, we are allowed to cesarean birth. So why are we not allowed to decide how we end our lives? As well as the releasing of patients from the hospital bed means more space for patients who actually can be saved. And we all want this to happen. Or do you, dear members of the audience, want to have in your conscience the prospect of keeping alive a terminal ill and suffering person rather than a consenting and respective individual wishing for the dying peacefully? And at this point of view, dear oppositions, don't you want to save lives? If we can take still the well-working organs from patients to save life of others who can't survive by donating an organ which is still well-functioning, or do you, dear killer oppositioner, want to kill living humans? I think you're here the mass murderer. Here I got a quote for you. I would like you to think about. Dying is not a crime, by Jack Kavarian. In conclusion, we are not promoting a culture of death. No, we are advocating individual choice, moral pluralism, and most of all, our freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am here today to describe the economical issues of euthanasia. It is very true that the cost of keeping a terminally ill patient alive is higher than that of euthanasia. However, think about this idea for a moment. If any of you feel that monetary concerns could support the proposition, then you are putting a price tag on life. Economy simply cannot be part of this issue. Human life has its intrinsic pricelessness, its uniqueness, its rights, and its responsibilities. Are we being selfish by putting our monetary concerns above the well-being of others by allowing euthanasia? Yes, we are. Another problem faced by the economic aspect of euthanasia is a shortage of money in the medical sector. With less and less money, the temptation is present to legalize euthanasia to provide money for other patients who have a better chance of living. It is true that there is a shortage, but there are other ways in which we can gain this money, especially from our luxuries. Isn't that interesting that we put so much worth on our luxuries? In spite of this fact, the USA alone loses $223.5 billion US dollars to incorrect alcohol use each year, while Medicare, the National Insurance Association of America, paid only $55 billion US dollars on terminally ill patients. Why don't we control the use of alcohol more tightly to reduce the costs made by incorrect uses of alcohol to give money for patients that need better medical treatment? Are we just letting the comfort of some people by taking in luxuries, grab well-needed money? Another similar pro-euthanasia argument is that a patient may want to do euthanasia to save the family's money. However, this is what is called a false dilemma that we have learned in Dr. Nadim's class, in which the pro-euthanasians give only two ways out. This is not the case. You do not simply do euthanasia to save money. There are other ways. For example, the UK, through the National Health Service, and Austria have shown that it is possible for a government to provide extensive medical care for its patients. Now, where is the pro-euthanasia economic argument? This is my final statement on this subject. If the proposition were to divert money to help other recoverable state patients, that is saying that these patients have more value than terminally ill patients. It is saying that human life only has value if it can be recovered and if it can help society. Ladies and gentlemen, life is not a monetary investment. It is God-given, it is unique, it is priceless.
Economics, ladies and gentlemen, is an ample part when it comes to discussing euthanasia. The highly anticipated economist Robert Leeson once said, "More than a quarter of medicine's annual budget is spent on end-of-life care. And as the UK government gives more than £50 billion to hospitals each year, this greatly sums up what an economic struggle the hospitals have to keep alive." Apart from the very important psychological and moral assets that euthanasia gives, we must not forget the great economic benefits that could appear by giving authorizations towards euthanasia. An increasing population of terminally ill requires even more treatments, hospital beds, and nursing, which are limited resources. Yet, many of these expenses could preferably be used towards those whom are curable and even have an actual chance to be in good physical conditions once more. Indeed, when a patient decides, I'm saying it is a choice, to die with euthanasia, this means that the resources that were used for him can be used for someone else. An example being a person who is not in a terminal state and as a consequence will be able to work again and participate in the economy, giving a possibility for curable people to be treated. This then permits them to enlarge their chances of contributing economically to society in the near future. Even if their continued existence may be meaningful personally to those who love them, they are only trying to avoid what's inevitable, death. But from an economic perspective, there are all costs and no benefits. Because hospitals have low budget to spend on hospital beds and nursing staff, euthanasia is seen as an excellent alternative to cost reduction. Indeed, legalizing euthanasia enables clinics to have a larger budget, as explained earlier. As a result, this spending plan permits them to either invest in better facilities or to lower the cost for curable people's treatments. As you can see, authorizing euthanasia will not only have an impact on the terminally ill and their relatives, but also on every single one of us when facing healthcare treatments. To conclude and summarize what my colleagues and I have tried to exhibit and present, it is important to remind you all that we are not embracing a culture of death, but rather promoting the quality, essence, and virtue of life. I hope we can all now agree on the fact that no one should have to die in the form of pain, experiencing agony, and rather have a peaceful life. Thank you.
Active euthanasia is justified in all contexts. Let's think about that for a few seconds. The argument for euthanasia usually involves this idea that we have a right to die. This is supported by the fact that suicide is becoming increasingly legalized in some countries and the fact that successful suicide is unpunishable. But we must really consider if the so-called right is a right that is to be gained. By legalizing euthanasia, we are not giving people the right to die, but we are giving other people the right to kill them. So yes, John, dying is not a crime, but killing someone is. So, for example, if we were to allow active euthanasia, we would be giving doctors or relatives the choice to terminate the life of a patient. Thus, this decision whether you live or die is put into the hands of someone else. Whilst it's most unfortunate to think of this decision could be made by family members who have ulterior motives, such as perhaps wanting to get their hands on an inheritance, or doctors that have become frustrated with long-term patients and thus decide to terminate their lives. Thus, allowing euthanasia will lead to malpractice and this abuse of power. The power to decide when someone dies, in essence, the power to play God. While someone might think that they are killing someone out of mercy, such as killing a comatose patient or someone in a permanent vegetative state, yet when we really think about it, killing people without their consent simply because they're old or handicapped or unwanted is not euthanasia that can be justified, but it is cold-blooded murder. You might have heard of that old joke that every debate always comes back to Hitler. But guess what? Hitler used forced, involuntary euthanasia to rid Germany of what he described as incurably sick, including children, under the mask of giving them a merciful death. Under this terrifying regime, an estimated 270,000 people were killed. Ladies and gentlemen, can any of you come up here and justify what Hitler did? Be my guest. No? Then how? Tell me how can you justify this motion? Thank you.